And then I
Wow.
discovered Bitcoin. And when I discovered Bitcoin, my mind exploded because I knew immediately the implications of a perfectly engineered monetary protocol.
Welcome back to the Zoom Out podcast. I'm Tim Niemeyer. I'm your host. Today, I am joined by Eric V. Stacks. Eric, thank you for joining me on the podcast.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I found Eric on Twitter, as many of you might have. He is a cannabis entrepreneur and also a content creator and a big Bitcoin advocate. For those of you who haven't seen him on Twitter, as you all know, I'm a music teacher, and I love music growing up. Eric, are you familiar with John Coltrane?
No, actually, I'm not.
Jazz saxophone great. And what I love about him is he's one of those guys that will kind of take you on a trip. He'll start going out on a tangent and keep going out. But as long as you follow him, your mind just gets more blown with every passage that he comes up with. And when I watch you walking around your greenhouse and sharing your thoughts on the state of the economy, society in general, Bitcoin, I have that similar feeling like I'm on a trip with John Coltrane. So,
nice.
So I guess my first question is, Eric V. Stacks, is the V for victory? What are we doing here?
Actually, V is my real middle initial. I have a German name, and Van is my middle name. And so I wanted to come up with, out of, I got all these anonymous figures on Twitter. And so when I decided that I was going to become a public Bitcoin advocate, or at the very least, I was going to share my opinions about the economy and the Keynesian broken money system that we have. I felt like I wanted to maintain some anonymity, but at the same time, also is kind of, maybe you could say, from like a branding perspective. And so, yeah, Eric V. That's my real name and middle initial, and then Stacks, obviously, because I stack sats. But that also plays into my cannabis career as well, because when you induce flower and you reduce the photo period from 18 hours of light to 12 hours of light, to get the plant to go from a vegetative state into a flowering state or a generative state, what you're attempting to do through irrigation strategy and substrate EC, which is like concentration of nutrients built up in the root zone, you're trying to induce the tightest possible stack that you can, because the more bud sites that you stack during that explosive bud set, the higher the probability is that you get a strong yield. So yeah, so there's like a dual thing there. So I stack my bud set really hard, and then I also stack sats as hard as I can.
I love that. I love that. So let's jump in there. How long? You seem like a pretty young guy. You've been doing this a long time. What kind of got you into this idea of a cannabis entrepreneur?
Yeah, so I'm 39 years old. I grew up in Southern California. The comprehensive but very short version of my story would be parents divorced. My mother, when I was like 5, my mother remarried to a psychiatrist. My parents had this like kind of tumultuous battle that I would say was Fiat incentivized. The divorce court system is there to extract profits more so than it is to like mend people's relationships. And so, yeah, I was, I had the privilege of watching my parents go through divorce court for many, many years. My mother remarries a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist, my stepfather, he was a prescribing psychiatrist. He worked for a prison system in Riverside County. And so he would give inmates all of these, antipsychotics and antidepressants and whatever. And so my mother ended up getting heavy into pharmaceuticals, mostly antidepressants and anti-anxiety pills, behavioral meds, whatever, because that's what the officials, the doctorate degrees, the important figures in our society, you could say at the time, put their stamp of approval upon, this approach to dealing with our emotional ailments, I guess you could say. And they didn't solve any of her problems. And what ended up happening is after 10, 15 years of pharmaceutical use, she ended up committing suicide when I was 20 years old. Yeah. And so witnessing her and her sister and a few other family members get involved in pharmaceuticals, I grew a big distaste for the pharmaceutical industry throughout my teenage years. After my experience with divorce courts, at one point, my little brother, who's 2 years younger than me, me and my brother had our own attorney. My dad had an attorney, and my mom had an attorney, just to figure out this custody conundrum and who's going to pay who child support and whatever. So it was pretty gnarly. And, we went to, oh gosh, so there's we would go to a mediator, and the mediator would be like, oh yeah, you could tell us whatever you want. Like, we're here to help you out. And then we won't tell any of your parents anything. Like, we're going to, and so I would, like, me and my little brother would be like, oh, my mom did this, my dad said that. We'd get in the car on the way home. My mom would be like, oh, so this is what you said? And so I developed this huge, enormous mistrust for the system that was the system that, like, we're told is there for our benefit. It's there to protect us, and it's all this societal infrastructure. And so I grew an enormous mistrust for the societal infrastructure, our society at large, in addition to a distaste for the mega industries, the pharmaceutical industries. And so by the time I was in my mid-teens, this was, 5-6 years before my mother died. But I'm watching the pharmaceutical use in my house. I had some friends that started smoking weed in high school. I smoked a little bit of weed. I'm like, I like this. This is a plant. Like, it makes you feel good. Like, I don't feel inclined to go, like, I don't know, participate in some scumbaggery. As a matter of fact, I'm not really interested in drinking all this alcohol that all my friends are. It makes my body hurt, but the weed doesn't, And so I developed an affinity for cannabis, an aversion for I don't know, just our system in general, I would say. I had an issue with the schools. I don't want to, I'm going to do I'm going to do all of the things that I need to do. I can pass the test, but I don't want to go home and then do a bunch of busy work. Like, so I kind of developed a perspective that was anti-society in some sense, anti our normal system. At this point, I know it's now the Fiat world. And so, but when I was 25 years old, a friend of mine invited me to come from Southern California to Northern California to work in outdoor harvest. I had been selling cars for a Toyota store, and I don't know. So it seemed like a great opportunity. They knew I had an affinity for cannabis. And so I came up here in October of 2009 to trim some outdoor weed for a medical marijuana farm. And I never left. I knew immediately when I got here what I was going to do. I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to move up here and I'm going to start growing cannabis. So
I love
that. A bit of a jumbled answer there, but I'm trying to give you the most, but condense it down.
You hit me right in the feels though, because myself growing up, there was some SSRIs for a large portion of my formative years. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I didn't feel like it was helping. I just felt like it was zombieifying me. It's like,
numbing.
Not making the feelings better, just taking away feelings in general. And my journey with cannabis was similar. It's like, hey, I don't feel bad afterwards. I don't feel less. I felt more of like everything else was weighing me down, pulling me under, barely keeping me afloat. But this is where I felt uplifted. And again, I don't drink hardly anything anymore for that very reason. I'll drink some wine every now and then. But a lot of similarities there. And it's funny because when you're in that formative stage, you don't see how that Fiat system kind of is controlling you. You don't see any of that, right? So it's I'm impressed that you're able to put that all together. That's amazing. So now you're full on medical cannabis. Then sometime after that, I would assume, or around that, you get into the Bitcoin rabbit hole, which probably just was Bitcoin is hard for everybody to grasp for the most part. But from what you're telling me, I'm guessing that it was pretty much like, oh, this is fucking obvious. This is the solution, right?
Yeah, you could say I was definitely primed or predisposed to understand the magnitude of Bitcoin based upon my specific life circumstances and the mistrust for our society or our governmental imposed systems, you could say.
The incentives.
Yeah, it's the incentives. And so when I discovered Bitcoin, it really blew my mind. And so in 2009, I came to Humboldt County. I started trimming. I worked for an individual for 2 years. I saved up some money. I set up my own little garage grow. I incorporated with the 501c3 so I could lawfully produce and distribute cannabis under the 215 laws at the time. So this is in 2012 or so. So I started to become aware of corporate structure. based upon my economic incentive, because I'm not a huge risk taker as much as that may not seem to be the case. I have a 100% allocation to Bitcoin, and I am a 15-year career cannabis professional. But I'm very risk adverse. So, you might not believe that, but yeah. So because I'm so risk adverse, I just did what was, available to me so that I could do what I was very called to do, which was produce cannabis, help to liberate cannabis from prohibition by satiating the demand in the marketplace with supply. And so for me, I kind of had this vengeance against the pharmaceutical industry. And every time I bag a pound, it's a royal FU to the pharmaceutical industry. And so that felt good to me. It's like, in some sense, I'm helping to offset the injustice that I see in the world. And I do think there's a place for pharmaceuticals, but I think that our system and our society abuses it. And there is this certain element of the incentive is to keep people hooked on these drugs so that you can continue to make perpetual profits off of them. And so there is an element.
Who's a real customer in this pharmaceutical system?
Totally. So a patient cured is a customer lost. Right. And so that's a real thing. And so, I incorporated with the nonprofit. I put in place all the appropriate paperwork so that I could lawfully produce cannabis and so on and so forth. In 2015, the governor of California, Jerry Brown, signed into effect a bill, Medical Marijuana Safety Regulations Act. MRSA was the name of the bill. And that bill put into effect the basic regulatory infrastructure for licensing and for adult recreational use of cannabis for the state of California. And that was done preemptively on the pretense that the people of the state of California would approve adult use in the 2016 elections, right? And so what happened is because I'm in Humboldt County being the mecca of cannabis production really in the world, the planning department and the board of supervisors, the local politicians, came up with their land use ordinance to permit cannabis activity so that when the state came in with licensing, that then they would be ready for the state to license the cannabis activity within Humboldt County. In that bill, MRSA basically said that if you're a county and you want cannabis in your county, we're going to permit and license it. You have to permit it, and then we're going to license it. And so,
we got to get their cut.
What's that?
They got to get their cut.
Everybody gets their cut for sure. Well, It's kind of like it's like a bar. To get a liquor license, you have to get a location you have to get a facility that's in the right location so that you're not too close to a bus stop or a school or whatever. Sure. And the local, politicians and governing officials are going to get together and figure out what rules they all agree upon, et cetera, et cetera. So I purchased some land in consultation with Humboldt County Planning Department and a whole team of people, like a CPA, a biological engineer, 2 attorneys. So I definitely was going through all of the processes so that I could get so that I could become the owner of a licensed cannabis farm. And so in buying this land and working with the county and working with the state and putting together this application and going through the regulatory process to get approved by the county, which I did in record times, it's a whole series of miracles. I'll leave out all the details. We don't have enough time for that, but it was a series of miracles. And so in that process, let's see here. So I closed escrow on this property I owned for 2 years. It took me a year to get it approved and licensed, which was like I said, just absolute miracles. The facility that I'm in now is across the street from the farm that I owned, and it took these individuals 6 years to get approved and up and going. And so anyways, when I closed escrow, I started to study the economy and monetary history in a new way where it actually really mattered to me. At that point, you could say in my life, I had the highest economic incentive that I had ever had to really care about the forces that I was contending with in the world. And so in doing so, I very quickly figured out that with our MMT, modern monetary theory, or our Keynesian lie of an economy, our monetary system, that we have issues in our society based upon not having a hard money standard anymore. We detached from gold. And so I, very quickly that made sense to me. I developed an affinity for gold and silver. This was all within 9 months, by the way. And then I
Wow.
discovered Bitcoin. And when I discovered Bitcoin, this is the end of 2017. This is like, I don't know, 9-12 months after closing escrow on this property. My mind exploded because I knew immediately the implications of a perfectly engineered monetary protocol based upon these two simple fundamentals. I'm a cannabis producer, and I've been watching the margins fall based upon supply meeting demand. So where you having like, now after years in Bitcoin, thanks to like Jeff Booth and Michael Saylor, I can really articulate and see very, very clearly the forces that I've been contending with in my life that made my life difficult. And those same forces is also what makes the Bitcoin so special. So where you have this large demand and you end up having more demand than you do supply, the free market will bid the price up. When the price gets bid up, the economic incentive for entrepreneurs and capital to flow into that sector of the marketplace, in this particular case is cannabis, and produce cannabis and satiate that demand with supply over time as whatever product it is, and again, in my case, cannabis, becomes more abundant, then the margins are going to fall. So in this period of time where our cannabis legalization is like, you know, there's this huge multi-billion-dollar industry with medical marijuana in the state of California, but it's becoming recreational. It's clear. The people voted it into effect. Counties and legislators, everybody's getting involved. Everybody had, you know, dollar signs in their eyes. It was this mad green rush. And as that's all taking place, I'm watching the pound price plummet. So as I'm looking at my business and my life strategy, I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, like my dream come true. Like here I am with the state license in my hand. In the beginning of 2018, I'm one of the first people in all of history to get a state license. Like this is a royal FU to all of the high school counselors that told me I was a delinquent piece of shit. You know what I mean? Like here I am, like vindicated. It's a big moment for me. Actually, it's a royal nightmare because I can't project into the future. I have no way of knowing what kind of profitability I have in my business.
Hey y'all, are you need a Bitcoin? You looking for a way to safely and securely store your Bitcoin? Check out the Bitcoin Advisors. These Bitcoiners are professionals that will provide you peace of mind so you can sleep soundly at night knowing your Bitcoin is safe. Remember to tell them Zoom Out sent you.
And so yeah, anyways, I was in a position where I knew that with Bitcoin, you had a monetary instrument that no matter what happens with the demand, the supply stays the same. And so I knew that it was either going to just destroy all models and it was going to be the apex property, the apex money, or however you want to say it, or the governments were going to shut it down. Now, over the preceding years, I realized that it's indestructible, et cetera, but that's how I discovered Bitcoin.
So that's amazing. And I want to kind of point at one thing that you mentioned, and instead of talking about like cannabis business, I remember hearing a stat years ago, I want to say Preston Pish, where he talked about if you look at, it might have been Michael Saylor also, if you look at the percent of growth like on companies in the S&P, over time, it's pretty much in parallel with the rate of growth of the money supply.
Correct.
So when you're looking at your cannabis business, you almost have to be continually making more and more profits if you're on a fiat standard, if you are using your dollar as your unit of account.
For sure.
So in Bitcoin, that's opposite. Like, so if you look at any company, Amazon, in terms of profitability over a 10 to 15 year period, it's always up and to the right on dollars, but it's down and to the right in terms of Bitcoin, right? They're being so that right there has to be difficult. Like, do you consider yourself? I mean, I assume you're on the Bitcoin standard, but like in terms of business, like the business decisions.
Yeah.
You chart yourself in terms of Bitcoin. I know I'm going to get deep in the weeds here. I said let's keep
perfect.
it light.
Yeah. So I do think I do denominate. I have to use. Okay, let's see here. I got like 7 things.
I'm sorry, I threw that at you.
No. Well, I mean, because you got to be careful with me because I can go on for hours, dude. So I'm trying to figure out how to condense this all down. I'm going to try to distill it down to the most important thing here.
Right on.
So yes, I do consider myself to be on a fiat standard. I denominate my life in Bitcoin. One Bitcoin is one Bitcoin. I have, if I have one Bitcoin, let's say hypothetically, then I have one out of a potential 21 million forever. actually something I just, side tangent, I could say that's here. I was chatting with somebody yesterday and I explained to them, I'm like, look, we're talking about the CFO here at the farm and some conversations I've had with him, and he was kind of poo-pooing Bitcoin when it was 20 grand a coin. And, so of course I'm talking a little bit of shit about, hey, so how's the CFO feeling about how his non-Bitcoin position? And I was like, the problem with the Keynesian economic model and the whole industry built around, I don't know, the Jim Cramers and all these people, Harvard level economists there. It's all of this noise. It's all of this confusion based upon this fundamental thing. How many dollars out of a potential how many, and then what rates are they coming into the marketplace? If we knew the debasement rate and knew what, like, if it was just say it was just 2% expansion every year, you'd actually be able to solve for that and be able to plan in the economy appropriately. But a group of insiders are controlling those levers, and they either are debasing at a faster rate or a slower rate or whatever. And so yeah, anyways,
you're not actually making business decisions in a vacuum. You're having to do all these extra things and make business decisions based on other people who can control your business decisions at a whim.
Yeah, well, it's this idea that you have no idea what's going to happen, but a group of individuals have an idea of what's going to happen. And so with Bitcoin, I know what's going to happen. The thing that's so beautiful with Bitcoin is it's an open, fair, decentralized ledger in a monetary protocol with a supply issuance that's programmatic, that nobody can change, that everybody knows about. So for the first time in human history, all 8 billion people, infinite people for all of forever now, can play the same fundamental economic game. Nobody has an advantage over somebody else. And so that's a big deal. That is the biggest deal ever.
You are risk averse, right?
Majorly, honestly.
And you don't have to, our current system forces people to be risky.
Totally. It does. It sends you further out on the risk curve, and it also causes you to diversify. You need to have this diversified portfolio, because each monetary instrument that you're using as a savings investment or whatever has some sort of different flavor of counterparty risk, and Bitcoin has none of those counterparty risks. So I hold 100% in Bitcoin because I am so selling any of my Bitcoin that, let's say, that I've been profiting, I've been buying Bitcoin since 2017, would be diversification. I'd be selling, as Sailor says, it's selling the winner to buy the loser. And so
I wrote that down, man. I hope you don't have that trademarked or something. I'm going to use diversified.
No, I don't. Diversified.
Oh, man, that's
so glorious. I do consider myself to be on a Bitcoin standard. I do think in terms of Bitcoin, but I do think about dollars, because dollars are a way for me to measure the spending power within the Bitcoin, because you have to denominate the things that you want in this world in something and then convert it to something. Like, so in my case, it makes sense for me to think in terms of dollars. That, and I have to pay my bills in dollars. I earn dollars. But everything, dude, I have at any given time, at the most, I have 1 month's worth of USD. Everything extra that I make goes right into Bitcoin. I live in a rental. I own 2 vehicles. I sold my house. I sold my farm. And this business that I'm managing now is not mine. I run a consultancy, business where I do farm management services. I set the facility up. I designed it. I've grown the crops for the last 2 years. Just basically ran the entire business because I'm very good at it. So I have all the upside, none of the downside, because owning a cannabis business, honestly, is probably one of the worst businesses to own in the economy today, because you have all of the fiat problems, but none of the fiat perks. And so where I really had an issue, and why, and it pushed me into Bitcoin, and it really pushed me to help to understand what's happening in the world through the lens of Bitcoin, because of this fundamental issue. Dollar-denominated inflation in my operating costs, my living costs, are going up denominated in dollars. But my wages are going down denominated in dollars. So it's like what you're speaking to. Over the last 100 years, the dollar debasement, the M2 money supply has increased to 7.5%, give or take, 7-8%, something like that. S&P's gone up 7-8%. Real estate's gone up 7-8%. With real estate, you subtract 1% in taxes, 1% in maintenance costs, then some mortgages. You're really bleeding out. You have management fees on your S&P index, because Schwab's going to take care of it. Edward Jones, someone's going to manage it for you. So it's really a net loss, and so in my case, like, it's kind of like I have the extreme version of this conundrum. You make $20 an hour and you get a 10% raise. Now you make $22 an hour, but your cost of living went up 15%. You took a 5% haircut. So in my case, though, a bulk wholesale pound 10 years ago was $3,000. Today, a better bulk wholesale pound is $1,000, but my cost of living is doubled, if not tripled. So I make between 1/6 and 1/12 what I used to 10 years ago. And how do you combat that? By scaling up? Well, as you scale up, and the whole industry does, well, you're further exacerbating the problem, because in my case, I'd be making cannabis more abundant and it's cheaper. I'm liberating it from prohibition. I'm bringing it to the market so it's abundant for whoever wants to use it, which for me, and especially in my personal life journey, I think is a great option for people, because I think it's a very safe medicine in addition to a very safe recreational drug. So in succeeding and achieving what I would like to see in the world, I am putting myself out of business. By cannabis being very cheap and abundant, I'm creating an existential crisis for myself as a cannabis producer on a fiat standard. However, because I'm on a Bitcoin standard and I've been sweeping my surplus for the last, 5 years, 6 years into Bitcoin, my balance sheet, the appreciation that's taking place on my balance sheet is so tremendous relative to the loss of income on my P&L that I am hedged against that loss of income. And if I wanted to continue to produce cannabis for the rest of my life, I could if I'm on a Bitcoin standard. It's kind of like the robot maker who makes a robot that makes robots. On a fiat standard, the guy is homeless. And some sociopath who built a regulatory moat around that technology and has a patent now is going to get all of the money. And the guy who did it, who doesn't have that patent, is going to live on the streets. But on a Bitcoin standard that liberates all of humanity and allows those productivity gains to flow to everybody else within the marketplace. Like Jeff Booth's book, The Price of Tomorrow, is very pivotal. And so I would say if there are people who don't quite understand Bitcoin, the most fundamental forces that make Bitcoin so special, it's listen to the Sailor series. I know that's a huge ask. It's like 20 hours.
It's a lot, but it's brilliant. It's brilliant.
If I was president of the universe, I would make everybody before they graduated high school listen to the Sailor series like 5 times. On 1X, too, all of you TLT, too long to read people are fucking ADD. 1X it. Listen at 1X, probably 3 times, and then listen to The Price of Tomorrow, because we live in a deflationary world, and we're driving prices down.
You're talking about the Sailor series on Robert Breedlove's What Is Money podcast.
Yeah.
For those that don't know, you got to check that out.
Yeah, big deal.
So let me make sure we got this. Your quality of cannabis is improving, but the rate at the quality of the currency that you're using is getting weaker. So
totally.
It's actually not just costing more because it's getting better, but it's costing a lot more because that currency, it takes more of that currency for the same amount of value.
Yes and no. So the debasement of the currency, as the monetary units are getting lent into existence as debt against assets, which is how our dollar system works. Fractional reserve lending is set up so that you go to the bank, you say, I need a mortgage. They lend you a bunch of money. That money that they lend you doesn't come from a treasury reserve and a vault in the back. It gets lent into existence. It didn't exist before they gave you the mortgage. At least 90% of it doesn't exist. When you're Elon Musk and you're like, I'm going to go buy Twitter and call it X, I want to borrow against all this Tesla stock, they literally create a multiple $40 billion out of thin air and give it to them. So the money's being lent into existence as debt against assets. So the debt collateralizes the money that's going into the marketplace. As the money gets injected into the economy, it trickles it into the economy through the velocity of money. It's changing hands. This person pays that person, they pay that person. We're trading money for goods and services. As that happens, the cost of living and operating goes up, and the last thing to increase is the wages. And so what we have is and everybody has a different version of the same issue, in that our cost of operating is going up, and we're trying to figure out how to get our wages or our ability to make the margins go up at the same rate. But here's the real rub. We live in a deflationary world, where human ingenuity and technological advancement is allowing us to make things more efficiently. We're channeling energy more efficiently to produce things more abundantly, which in turn does actually drive prices down. But prices have to go up because of the money system requiring that the assets really in the marketplace have to appreciate in value. Otherwise, the debt becomes insolvent. So we have a system that you could say in the most fundamental terms requires prices to go up on everything. However, with our human ingenuity and technology, we're pushing prices down on everything. So it's two fundamental opposing forces. Prices need to go up, but we're pushing prices down. And so it's two forces that are kind of bifurcating our world and shredding our reality. And it's a monumental problem.
And the hardest thing for a lot of people to understand is the difference between real and nominal. Like the real value of something versus, like, they see a number going up. That doesn't actually mean that thing is more expensive. It just means the value of what we're measuring against is getting weaker.
Yes. So for example, I do think about the farm that I sold. So I had 17 acres. It was 2 parcels, 2,800 square foot house with 10 acres and then 7 acres raw. Then ended up having a licensed cannabis facility on it. When I bought the property, it was like, I can't remember how many Bitcoin it was, but it was significantly like 5 or 10, probably like 10x more Bitcoin to buy the property then than to buy the property today. So if you denominate things like real estate in Bitcoin, you can actually see the exact opposite of what is taking place when you denominate it in dollars is happening. And something I tell people too that's real, like what happens with your Ford pickup truck is the same thing that's happening with real estate, but you just can't see it because the dollar which you denominate the value of the truck and the real estate in is losing its purchasing power so fast that it creates the optical illusion of the real estate going up in value. But it's actually going down in value like your truck is, but you just can't see it because the dollar is getting debased at a fast enough rate that it's creating the optical illusion of increase in value, but it's increase in dollar denominated value. And another way I would explain that is if you have a paid for piece of property, let's say it's $1 million piece of real estate. That piece of real estate is appreciating on average at 7.5% a year, and it has for the last 100 years. The M2 expansion in the money supply is 7.5% a year on average, but you have 1% maintenance costs and you have 1% tax. So if the property is paid for, you're losing 2% a year. Actually, your real yield is 5, where you're appreciating at 7. So you're actually losing 2%. Which you have to now stick money in to maintain this asset. And you could look at this, and this is something Saylor said in his keynote for Bitcoin Prague last year. He explains this. That equates to a 35-year half-life. Over 35 years, you have to dump half the value of the property back into the property to maintain the value of the property. And that's the same thing that happens with gold because gold is being debased at 2% a year. We expand the gold supply by 2% a year every year. So you lose half the value over 35 years. So real estate is going up in dollar denominated value because we're expanding the currency supply, but it's actually not going up in value. At best, it's staying at the same value, requiring monetary energy to go into it to maintain it, plus taxes that you have to pay to whatever local jurisdiction. And it could actually be 2%. I think it's 2% in Oregon, and some other states have 2% real estate tax. So anyways, it creates this optical illusion where people think they're getting wealthier, but they are bleeding out. They're having to pour economic energy surplus that they're earning in the marketplace to maintain their wealth in these defective assets.
So let me ask a question then. Maybe not in your business, but just in your world, in your Overton window, do you see people waking up to this in the shift as far as entrepreneurs and businessmen in terms of doing more of their business in Bitcoin, either receiving or, I see a lot of companies starting to put it on the balance sheet, just as that backstop, Michael Saylor's melting ice cube idea. But as far as the day-to-day, whether it's using the Lightning Network or whatever. Do you see that, or have you had any conversations trying to work your people towards that?
So because I've been doing a bit of traveling more recently, due to the content I've been creating, I've been asked on podcasts like this, and I've been going to events. I was in Madeira. That was a really epic conference, and I was just, it was super fun. I was just in El Salvador for 2 weeks for the halving party.
I'm living vicariously through you. I get it.
Yes, that was a really good time. I will say that was quite a special experience. So yeah, I've been using Lightning, and I've been doing a bit more of that as a result of the traveling and participating in like the Bitcoin social layer. But for me, in my physical sphere in Humboldt County, I have been helping other people understand the magnitude of adopting Bitcoin as a treasury reserve asset or as a savings technology. And the main reason, and I think that that's just as important as attempting to create local circular economies, which this is very controversial amongst the Bitcoin maximalist community, but I'll go ahead and just say it. I don't know that that's the most responsible thing to attempt to do unless you're okay with the risk associated with that. Like, I do know some people who are like, screw the man, I'm anti-government, and I'm going to build my little circular economy, and I'm going to trade eggs for my Bitcoin on Lightning and do all these things. I think that's fantastic. However, I'm not interested in creating a bunch of tax complications. So every time you sell Bitcoin, technically, so if I'm in Madeira and I buy coffee with Bitcoin on Lightning, I'm creating a taxable event. And it could be a loss, but it could be a gain. And so now I have to report that. And so I think the power of Bitcoin currently in the States really lies in as an investable asset, as a treasury reserve asset, or as a savings technology. I would suggest that people purchase Bitcoin. First, I suggest that people really learn about Bitcoin.
Yep.
And then as you learn about it, what happens is you realize that it's the best investable asset that you can buy. And if you're saving in it, I like to keep my bookkeeping and everything as simple as possible. So if I have to sell Bitcoin, I would like to sell a larger chunk or do it less often or whatever. And really the goal is to not sell the Bitcoin and remain productive and sweep my earnings and surplus into Bitcoin.
It's that risk averseness coming back. It's simplified the whole process. And it kind of reminds me of what you're talking about, of that chart of like the arc of making a money. You know, it's that digital collectible. Yes. And it becomes the store of value.
Yes.
Medium exchange, or unit of account, medium exchange. So
yes,
we're still in that store of value transition, if you will.
But it's you got to look at it like gold. You don't want to go around and sell off little pieces of your gold position to buy things in the States, because gold is taxed as property and it creates taxable events. And so that's how I treat Bitcoin. So there are people trying to put together infrastructure for Lightning payments and whatnot for dispensaries, and as much as some of the Bitcoin community might not want to hear me say that, it's not time for that. Maybe it's time to be working on the technology, but I don't advocate that people do that. I'm not trying to get people to pay me in Bitcoin, because it just creates more of a tax impedance. We have to use dollars. Dollars are the currency. The reason that they're the currency is because the government allows you to. You're essentially selling the dollars when you buy something. You go to the pump, you give them $100 to put into your pickup truck or whatever. In my case, in California, it's $100 because gas is really expensive. Sure. And so that you're technically selling the dollars for gasoline at that point, right? And so with dollars, there's no taxable event. You can bring dollars in, you can trade dollar, whatever. There's no taxable event. Anything else that you're selling in and out of technically you're creating a taxable event. And so, I don't advocate people use Bitcoin as a currency, but I think what will happen over time is I think that we are in for, like, Bitcoin is like this Trojan horse of freedom and fairness. And it's also it's really the first money humanity's ever had. We had gold, which was yellow, shiny rock we were pulling out of the ground. And where gold hit its technological limitations because of its physicality, we had to have warehouses and then certificates that represented the gold that people then traded within the marketplace. And where that hit its limitations, or more so where it was corruptible, now we have a totally detached, free-floating fiat currency, which is really just nation-state issued currency certificates, right?
ex nihilo, out of nothing.
Totally.
You know,
well, that's not engineered money. It's like this runaway train almost. And so
like
with Bitcoin, it's
calls up political currency units, right?
Totally. Exactly. Yes. And so Bitcoin is the first money humanity's ever had. And because it's a thermodynamically sound monetary instrument, and its hardness is such that that the stock to flow ratio is so high, and all of the other properties and value propositions or whatever that it has to offer make it so that it's so attractive as a monetary instrument, and it's so much better than all of its other competitors, that its appreciation rate is so high that what I think is going to take place is that central banks and governments, and it's happening from the ground up, but now from the top down as well with these funds and nation states, as they put it on the balance sheet and it appreciates over time, what will end up happening, I think, is that we're going to end up backing our currencies with it. And then at some point in the future, you're going to have politicians and governing bodies that are like, look, we don't even need these currencies anymore, because the Bitcoin is the money that's backing the currencies, and it's actually capable of operating as the world's money. But we are in a monumental transitionary phase right now, and that could take 50 years, could take 500 years, I don't know, but Bitcoin will be the world's money. Yeah. But it is capable of being the world's money, which is so fascinating about it. It's a savings technology. It's a form of property like gold or real estate, but it is also capable of being the world's money. Yeah. So that's a big deal.
Man. So if I can, and we're going to be wrapping up because I know you're a busy man and I appreciate all your time, but I kind of want to go back and restate my introduction. Not only cannabis entrepreneur, not only content creator, but can we add in badass economist? Like,
yeah, well, thank you.
Because the stuff that, like, I just watched a Natalie Brunell link where somebody was interviewing an actual economist, PhD, and he couldn't really even explain the money printing and the treasury, how we buy treasuries. And it's all smoke and mirrors. It's all a card game, like you're saying. And I love how you said Bitcoin is the first real money. And that's what I feel that what you and I are doing here is we're trying to help people understand there is something better out there.
Oh, yeah.
If you can't see how the system is broken in the first place, you're not going to see where the solution is. You got to know the problem before the solution. And I love how you articulated all that. Eric, is there anywhere that besides Twitter that you'd like to send the guests?
Currently, it's Currently, it's only Twitter, but I do have Eric V Stacks a handle for YouTube, and I am getting some things together. I'll start putting all of the content that I create on YouTube as well. It's been Twitter exclusive as far as the videos that I make, and I make videos talking about the long-term philosophical and societal implications of Bitcoin, the how profound it is for the economy, and I don't know, et cetera, et cetera. And I've been posting those videos on Twitter. They will be coming to YouTube shortly. I've had to, it's been so much to keep up with the traveling and the podcast and whatever, that that hasn't hit to YouTube yet, but I am working on that. So yeah, but
Twitter share currently, out whatever you have. I love your energy. I love your focus, and I wish the best for you moving forward. If there's anything I can do to help you out, let me know. Eric V Stacks, thank you for joining me on Zoom Out.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. It was awesome.
Appreciate it.